This is Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast.
So I did these animations of Mr. and Mrs. Pac Man going across the screen, and then they came back the other way, and there were little babies. And Namco came along and said, that's a little too suggestive. As far as I know, I think that was the first Easter egg by an artist.
I'm Kevin Savitz, and this is an interview episode of Antic, the Atari 8-bit podcast. Alan Murphy was Senior Animator at Atari, where he worked from 1980 through 1987. Alan created the graphics for the Atari 8-bit versions of Defender, Xevious, Galaxian, Countermeasure, Pac Man for the 5200, Demons to Diamonds for the 2600, and many other games. He also worked with engineers at Atari Research on research projects and prototyping, and designing specs for game art and animation systems. This interview took place June 15th, 2015. Which came first, when you were hired by Atari, or like the first time you saw an Atari computer?
I worked for a company, or I should say a magazine, called InfoWorld in Palo Alto. Mm-hmm. And, so I was illustrating articles about early computers probably 2 years before I actually put my hands on one. So, yeah, I mean, the Atari 800 was, around before I actually started at Atari. And I think I remember illustrating something for it.
Awesome. So you're working at InfoWorld, and as an artist primarily?
Yeah, I was their editorial illustrator. I did their the magazine covers. I did, editorial illustration, stuff like that.
Neat. All right. So how did you end up at Atari?
I got tired of doing magazine stuff. It's just really hectic. They had me putting a cover out every week in addition to lots of editorial stuff, which is fun, but it's just, I don't know. I just felt like I wanted something more. And the computers piqued my interest. I mean, I was reading lots of articles about early computers. In those days, it was mostly mainframes. There was a few, I don't remember the 800. I probably have. I'd have to do some research here. I think the 800 actually came out after that, because I remember working on lots of really early machines, and I think the Apple I was the first PC that I remember thinking, man, I want to have one of those. And they were super expensive, and I was like, all right, you know what? Let me do some digging. And someone told me about Atari. Like I had, heard about them, but not really looked into it. And kind of on a lark, I went out there and I said, yeah, hey, I want to work for your company. And they're like, okay. It was just like that. I hit them at the right time for a job interview, and they pretty much hired me on the spot, which was awesome.
Nice. So what'd you start working on? Or what was your title when you were hired?
Let's see. I think I was called a animator. I forget. I think they called it something crazy like, games animation artist or something like that. I don't know what it was, but I was basically a lowly artist. There was one artist there before me, who was the girlfriend of one of the programmers, and she's the one I interviewed with, and I was her first hire.
So what did they drop you into? What did you start working on?
I'm trying to remember. I worked on, I think Galaxian was my first game. And after that, I worked on something called Hot Rocks, which I think was released under the title, what was it? I forget. My memory's horrible. Anyway, and then I think the next thing I worked on was Pac Man on the 5200.
Oh, nice. All right, so let's start with Galaxian. Like, what was involved in creating the graphics for that? I mean, in Galaxian, of course, it was being ported from the arcade game. So did someone hand you, would they just show you the arcade game and say, do this? Or did they hand you art that someone else created on graph paper? I mean, how did the process work?
Yeah, no, it was pretty much like that. just said, we have nothing, make it look good. And lots of artists were sort of intimidated by that. I thought it was pretty cool. I just went into the game room and looked at the game and said, okay, this pixel goes here, this pixel goes there. They have 10 sprites. You've got 4 colors. Have fun. And that's kind of a lot. I think I might have used graph paper at the very beginning, but then after a while, I was like, screw that. Let's just, plow ahead here. And after a while, it became second nature. We had really no software either. It was kind of like you had to, I think there were some very primitive tools, but until we had some custom tools, it was kind of a pain in the ass. I mean, it used to kind of drive me nuts. Like, all I want is a pixel. How hard can this be, right? But you had to use a shoehorn to get anything to work. It was not a lot of fun.
So what did you deliver? Did you actually have to code it yourself, or did you give them a computer file, or did you give them what did you deliver to the programmer?
Yeah, I think the very first time it was kind of hand drawn on graph paper, but after that we had a tool that Dave Torah wrote that made it easier. I think it was called Animat or something like that, and okay. It worked on an 800, and it would save to a 5.5-inch floppy, and we would just hand that over, and they'd be happy.
So were you working on like the sprites? Did you do background graphics? Did you do everything?
Yeah, everything. Yeah. I think the first time there was a lot of hand holding, and I had to, I didn't even know what the hell I was doing. And I worked with a guy named Joe Tung, and he was really good. He sat me down and said, this is what we want, this is how you do it. I think it took like 10 minutes, and it wasn't that hard. But after that, it was pretty simple. And then I think I worked with a few guys, giving them suggestions for, how we could streamline the process. And I think that's when the program was written. They said, well, we could speed up the development time exponentially if we had some software here. And I think that's when Dave wrote his program, and things were pretty easy after that.
I'm aware of a graphics tool that might have come later called the Sweat system that did made for making graphics and sound assets. Was that what you used? Did you ever use that?
No. I think that was General Computing in New York. I've heard of that, but we never used it. I think at the time that rolled around, I think that was later on, and we had already pretty much bought into Dave's program, and so I don't remember using that at all.
Okay. All right. So you did the graphics for Pac Man. That seems like maybe that was easier than Galaxian.
Yeah. Well, the thing about Pac Man was you couldn't wing it. It had to be perfect. Namco actually came by, and they were very, very particular. In fact, I think they were saying, you need to change this because it's not right. I don't know. The color was off by a few values or something. And I remember that one not being that much fun. It was very nitpicky. Of course, it was a big deal, and I understood it, but it was like, come on, guys, really? But anyway, that was a little more difficult than the others.
Yeah. So tell me about the intermissions you made for Pac Man.
Oh yeah. I guess you got my email, huh?
I did.
Yeah. So I was like, kind of thinking this is pretty boring. Their intermissions were basically taking the art from the game and moving them across the screen. I don't know if you remember them, but they were kind of not very exciting. And at that point, I was really into creating cool animation, and I figured, well, what the hell? Let's do something fun here. And so I did these animations of Mr. and Mrs. Pac Man going across the screen, and then they came back the other way, and there were little babies. And Namco came along and said, They're like, that's a little too suggestive. I'm like, what? But Yeah. So, and there were a few other ones, and I remember they brought the marketing people by with some people from Japan and I don't know, some of the higher ups, and they just kind of nodded and smiled, and then it went away. And the next day, it was like, no, we can't do this. And I found out why, and they just thought it was too risque. And I'm like, wow, really? But that's the life of an animator.
Sure. It's silly. It's crazy. Yeah, because in Miss Pac Man, in the third intermission, there's a baby. A stork delivers it.
Well, there you go. So, I never played Pac Man, so I don't even remember. I have no idea what's in these games, but this was probably before that. So
Yeah.
maybe they ripped me off. I don't know.
But they decided it wasn't as tawdry as they thought originally. So,
Yeah.
So tell me about this Hot Rocks game.
Oh, Hot Rocks. I'm trying to think. Demons to Diamonds. That was the name of it. And there was really not much to say. It was on the 2600. Really primitive graphics, really primitive gameplay. It was a variation of Space Invaders, I think. I haven't played it in probably 40 years, whatever it's been. But what's interesting about that game is that the programmer was a really strange guy. We had a lot of these guys that were Mensa, really, really bright, but kind of off. And this guy, I think his name was Sandy Mywall, changed his name to Nick Danger, I think. You'll have to look that up. But it was, I think the guy was living in some kind of strange noir novel or something, and he would come to work and say and act and do the weirdest things, but I probably shouldn't be saying this kind of stuff, but that was my first experience with strange programmers, and there were a lot to come after that.
Crazy. So you worked on Demons to Diamonds, which was a 2600 thing, and then the 5200 Pac Man, and it seems like you were not beholden to any one platform. They had you working all over the place.
Yeah, that's kind of how it was. I think I pushed to work on one game, but pretty much everybody got all the. There ended up being a lot of animators working there, and they would just sort of move us to what project was hot at the time, and that's kind of the way it worked. I really wanted to work on Indy Jones, and that was probably the only one I remember, asking to work on. And I actually got it, so that was good. But for the most part, it was just like, you work on this, have fun.
Right. What other things do you remember working on?
Well, let's see. I have a list here.
Excellent.
You want me to read it off?
Sure. I'm most interested in the stuff for the 8-bit computers, but
oh, okay,
because that's what we focus on in the podcast here. So
okay,
let's talk about those.
I worked on a lot of stuff that never got released. I was kind of an R&D guy. Because I was one of the first guys, the first animators. They figured I knew the most or something. I don't know, but they kept putting me on, kind of skunk projects, and so a lot of these you probably haven't heard of. There was one called Black Belt. Let's see. There was a golfing game. Let's see. I worked on what they used to call a Pack Out, which is a game that ships with new systems. I worked on some graphics programs. I worked on a lot of 3D stuff, but that was mostly for arcade, coin-op stuff. So let's see, for 8-bit, I had Pac Man, Xevious, Defender, Galaxian. Let's see, is that it? Oh, Countermeasure, Space Dungeons, Soccer, Real Sports Volleyball, Demons to Diamonds, something called Accelerator, and Neochrome, which was their commercial art application. And I think that's it.
That's a good list. The So, okay, when you're working on Galaxian or something, or Pac Man, it's pretty clear what it needs to be because you're building from
Right.
existing assets. Were there times where it was just like, we don't just draw it, just figure something out. We need a soccer player or a volleyball player, and it was up to you to draw it from scratch?
Yeah, exactly. Atari's original titles were all like that. The one I'm thinking of was Real Sports Volleyball. That was pretty much winging it. Bugs Bunny was another one. Of course, no, that's not true because that was a licensed IP, and we had to do it by the book. But even some of the released coin-op titles that we're reporting, the companies that we bought the license from knew that there was only so much you could do with an 8-bit computer, so they gave you a lot of license anyway. Mm-hmm. So, for example, I'm going to use an arcade game, even though I know you're interested in the 8-bit stuff, but I worked on a game called Xevious. I don't know if you remember that one, but
sure. Yeah.
I mean, the graphics ended up being on, I think it was the 7800, which is the successor to the 2600, were wildly different than the arcade version. But they didn't care because they knew there was only so much you could do. We only had so many colors. The resolution wasn't as high, things like that. So they gave you some artistic license, which was good because trying to get it like the arcade game would have been next to impossible, except for something like Pac Man or the simple sprite shooters. Those are pretty, limited in what you could do. I mean, it was already limited, so it wasn't that hard to get it right.
So tell me about your the Easter egg you got into failsafe on the 1500.
Yeah. As far as I know, I think that was the first Easter egg by an artist. I know there were a lot of programmers that like to sneak their name into the code and parts of the game, and you never really find them unless they tell you. I decided to do the same thing, and the way I hid it is it would only occur when the screen color cycled, which is an early way of showing cheap color animation on a computer. Mm-hmm. And so the art that I delivered, you couldn't see it. It was only when you color cycled, and I thought that was pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. That's neat. So, yeah, was it like the attract mode or during the
the game was Countermeasure, I think it was what they called it. Mm-hmm. Or they might have changed the name, I forget. But
Countermeasure, that's what it was.
Countermeasure, okay. And at the end of the game, if you didn't type in a failsafe code, the world blew up. And there was a screen that came up with a skull and crossbones. And in one of the bones, I can't remember if it was on the left or the right, I put my initials in there. And
yeah, you sent me the screenshot of it.
But you couldn't really see it. You couldn't really see it unless it color cycles. That was the thing.
That's really cool. So what inspired you to do that?
Just
looking for recognition, or
well, just to see if I could get away with it. I mean, I think that was that's what the programmers were doing. You weren't supposed to do that, and they would do it anyway and see if they'd get caught. And I said, well, okay, I can do this. Right?
Did you get away with it?
Yeah, it's in the game. If you play it, it's there.
Well, I mean, did it come down on you later? Like, we found what you did?
No, it showed up in one of the magazines that it might have been Antic. I don't know. So some magazine said, hey, look what we found. And they didn't know who I was because I was just the artist and we didn't get a credit. Actually, the programmers never got credit anyway. But they're like, does anybody know who this is? And I don't know. I just remember something about that in one of the magazines.
All right. So you were there for a lot of years. And you were doing more than just art. You said you were doing research projects and prototyping. So tell me all about all that.
Okay. Well, let's see. So I was working in the consumer division, which is the 2600 and the 5200 until the big crash. What was it, 84?
Yeah, late 83 or late 84, I think.
Yeah, and so I was working in Aptos in kind of a remote research group, and so we didn't really get the news of how bad things were at the main headquarters in Milpitas. And one day I just got this call, and they said, "You're basically laid off." And I'm like, "What?" And anyway, at the time I was working on a lot of different like original title stuff with some friends and over there, and it was kind of a shock. But that very week, they hired me in coin-op. I guess they let go of some other coin-op artists, and they hired me to replace them because I guess I was good. I don't know. Anyways, I ended up working back in Milpitas again for coin-op, and I remember as soon as I got there, I got put on like a kind of a Atari's first prototype for 3D hardware, and so they said, "You're doing 3D now," and I'm like, "All right," because I've always been attracted to that. Now, so I was number one. I was really happy that I didn't get laid off. Number two, here I was. Okay, I had to go back to the Valley, which kind of sucked, but at least I was doing something I really liked. And so they put me on all these prototypes for their 3D hardware. One in particular, something called Air Race. I don't know if you got a chance to look at the link I sent you, but it was pretty much the first commercial 3D prototype, and I did all the art for that, and that was amazing. It involved a lot of real. You had to think spatially. There was a 3D system they had there that was not very evolved because it was new, and so all the points in 3 space had to be entered by hand, something called Cartesian coordinates, on graph paper. And the first thing I remember working on was The Last Starfighter. I don't know if you remember the movie from early 80s. Mm-hmm. I designed their little spaceship that they fly off and kill aliens in, and all on graph paper, and it took me, I don't know, 2 weeks. But it came out perfect. I mean, it was this fantastic thing, and so they're like, okay, so Alan knows what he's doing. Let's write him a tool. And there's a guy in a coin-op named Jim Morris who wrote this fantastic 3D tool, which, as far as I know, was probably the first 3D, design tool for an artist. And so I spent at least 2 years working with that on various prototypes and stuff for their arcade division. Great fun. Just loved it.
Awesome. So you were there at Atari for 7 years in various departments, it looks like, right? From 80 to 87. Were you at coin-op until the end?
Yeah, towards the end, it started to not be that fun. There was a lot of political infighting. The sales on a lot of the different games weren't doing that well, and there was just this sense of Atari having been played out, and so I quit. And but I'd done my homework, and I'd found a pretty nice gig to get into before I did. But it was basically, I was just kind of getting really tired of the whole scene. I don't know if it was burnout or what, but I think it was 87 when my son was born. I said, okay, I'm out of here. And that was that. No real hard feelings. I was just kind of tired of the whole thing and kind of wanted to get out on my own, start my own business. And that's what I did.
Okay. So you just up and said thank you and quit, and that was it?
Yeah. There was one guy in particular that I was kind of mad at, but mostly it was just burnout. I was just, I don't know how many games I worked on, and it was just, I want to do something new. Right. And so I ended up working. I started my own company, and for the next 20 years, I worked at home, and it was great.
Yeah. Cool. Just tell me about the culture at Atari. Was there a lot of was it work or was it goofy fun? I mean, you mentioned your email, the 6-foot-high rolling Pac Man, which I think kind of might answer my question. But
well, a lot's been said about it, and it's mostly true. I mean, it was a crazy place. There's no company before or since that I've ever heard of that was anything like Atari. Oh my God! There was a time when I was like, I can't believe someone's paying me to do this. It was basically a huge party, and that's really not an exaggeration. Everybody wants to glorify something or other, and a lot's been said about that, but it was true. I mean, It was just this crazy place that everybody, they got their work done, which is the only reason they let it happen. But they figured it, in order, you should watch that. Well, you probably have, but what is it? There's been interviews with Nolan Bushnell where he talks about it, and his philosophy was we have to have a creative environment if you want to get creative stuff done, and that's pretty much what we did. There were all kinds of, just every day there was something crazy going on, and I don't know where to begin. It was just nuts. I ended up kind of secluding myself because later on at Coinot, because it just got really to the point where it was hard to get anything done because it was just constant parties. And I enjoyed what I did, so I figured, well, there's only one way I'm going to do this, and that's by hiding out at least when I need to get work done. Mm-hmm. And anyway, so that's the way it was.
What haven't I asked you that I should have?
I wish I were still working there at times. It was really a fantastic place. I really miss those days. Yeah. I'm retired now, and everybody's like, "Well, you should be enjoying your life." But there's times when I'm like, "Man, I miss that." Just Atari was, one in a million.
It's interesting you say that because you kind of, I don't want to say complained about it, but you said it was too much partying and you like to seclude yourself, and then there are guys that at the end that you're not happy with and you end up quitting. And
but that's just me. I mean, I tend to be negative, or at least really intolerant at times. And I think there's a place for partying, but I was pretty serious about what I was doing, and I don't know, it's just my nature. And I mean, I partied with the best of them, but I was pretty serious about what I did, and I really needed that space. And that's eventually why I quit, because it just, after a while, it's just crazy. And, there's more to life than partying, right?
Yeah. So when you're doing the graphics, I mean, I know sometimes limitations in a project can be very helpful. So, but with the severe limitations of the hardware, whether it's the arcade or the Atari 2600 or something, was it ever too limiting and just like, wow, I can't do this. This is not possible? Or were the constraints good or bad or both? Well,
both. A used to drive me nuts because I came from an illustration background. I've got I went to school, studied illustration and fine arts, and you just can't understand how difficult it is to not be able to draw a curve, for example, or get the color you want, or be limited by something called pixels. After having no restraint, in anything as far as art is concerned, and then having to deal with that was so frustrating. And eventually, I got it, but it took a lot of effort and a lot of discipline just to force myself to work with these primitive tools. Yeah, it was. On the other hand, I mean, after a while, it became this. It was good having those restraints because once you understood what you're dealing with, it was kind of fun to say you've actually created something worth looking at, with those constraints, and having people look at 8 pixels and go, "Oh wow, that's nice."
Right.
I don't know. After a while, you kind of got to where it was okay, I guess.
Right. So you did tell me about the animated short you did for the Gauntlet commercial.
Oh, okay. That we knew Gauntlet was going to be a big deal because we field tested it in an arcade, and it was kind of like Pong all over again. It broke the coin drop, and people were, we filmed them, and you could tell that they were pretty excited about this game. So, Atari went all in, and they said, let's make a TV commercial, and I was part of that. We had some professional animators who actually worked at Atari, but they kind of took the lead on that, and I helped out. I did I did the title screen, I believe it was, for, or actually the closing shot. There was this big door that closes, and the word gauntlet comes up, and then there's an animation of a glint going through the lettering, and that was all me. And then I helped out with the cell painting. It was actually old school, traditional, drawn cells, thousands of them to create the animation. And so someone actually drew them, and then someone had to go back in and paint them, color them in, so they were all consistent. We used, animation stands, and we flipped through the cells and made sure everything was right. And we came in on weekends to do it, which was, I think I remember them saying, "You have to." I was a little bit upset about that because I really wanted my weekends to be my own.
Sure.
But came out really nice. It's on the web somewhere if you search for, I don't know, Gauntlet TV commercial. It's pretty primitive by today's standards, but at the time it was, it was a nice commercial.
Gauntlet, the new fantasy adventure from Atari Games. The most fun a quarter can buy.
So when you struck out on your own, you did some animation projects for Apple?
Yes, that's right. They were my first client, and that's why I was not too worried about quitting, because they were a big fish. And some of the people that worked at Atari went to work for different companies, and I called a few of them up when I was thinking about quitting, and I got the gig at Apple, and that lasted for years. That was really great.
What were you doing for them?
Kind of the same thing. I remember doing software stuff. One of the things I worked on that I can remember was Apple introduced the first CD-ROM in, I guess, 1988 or 9, somewhere in there, and so I worked on the software that had explanations for how to use it, basically. And so that's what I worked on. And then I don't know, there were lots of little side projects. I don't remember them now.
Cool. And I guess my other question is I know later you worked at Zynga.
Yeah.
So it sounds like once again you were doing tiny graphics.
Yeah.
Graphics for tiny screens again, and I don't know.
That's my life.
Yeah. Is there any parallels between doing that and doing graphics for the early Atari machines, or is it a completely different animal?
No. No, okay. I at that point, I started at Zynga as a 3D artist, and because I was there early on, I kind of rose my hand and ended up being art director, and so I ended up getting away from the actual art and more into a management situation, and which I kept my hand in because I go crazy if I don't make art. I'm just sort of an artist through and through, and so I said, look, I'll manage these people, and I'll ride the spreadsheet and tell them what to do and yada yada, but I still want to do this art and for my sanity, and they kind of let me do that, so that was great. I could not be a full-time manager. I don't know how people do that. But what was your question? I'm sorry.
I have no idea.
Okay.
It was something about any parallels between doing graphics for small screens now and doing low-res graphics for Atari machines back then.
Yeah.
But I was just fishing.
I'll say this. I'll say that the tools are so much nicer now. Maya is amazing. Mudbox and ZBrush are just unbelievable compared to what we had to use. So there really isn't any parallels. I mean, you're doing the same thing. You're creating art for video games, right? I mean, it's all pixels. That's the way I look at it. But oh my God, the tools now are just amazing. So I've always been drawn to complex stuff like 3D authoring software and graphics stuff, and it's always been my thing to just try and master them better than anybody else if possible. And for the longest time, I did that, and I kind of prided myself on, that. And so that was good. I mean, up until probably 3 years ago, I was just on top of all that stuff. Now I kind of don't care. But oh my God, the tools now are just crazy good. So that's the one thing I'll say.
Cool. All right. I think this is my last question.
Sure.
If you could send a message to the Atari computer community that still exists, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
Why are you doing this? No, I'm just kidding. Keep the spirit alive. To me, I'm still amazed that people give a shit about this stuff. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. It's like if you can buy a current PC, why are you playing around on an 800 unless you're a historian? I mean, that part I understand. But, I think it's great that people like yourself and Bill Kendrick and others and, are keeping it going. Huzzah.
Awesome. Well, great. I think that's what I need. Thank you, Alan.
Okay. Thanks for the interview.
Thanks for your time today.
You too. Thanks. Bye.
Bye. If you enjoyed these interviews and would like to contribute something, I encourage you instead to donate to one of our favorite organizations, the Internet Archive, at archive.org. The Internet Archive is a nonprofit digital library with the stated mission of universal access to all knowledge. They've done incredible things to preserve computer history, including hosting thousands of programs in an in-browser Atari emulator, creating the Wayback Machine, and offering full-page scans of countless Atari computer books and magazines. Make your tax-deductible contribution at archive.org/donate.